Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Wargaming unit reviews for Star Wars Legion, and today we are going to be looking at Cad Bane. Now, I've never really been into the Clone Wars, but I do have a lot of respect for this character. I think he's a great foil to both Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I love the Clint Eastwood Western vibe he has, and I think he fits in perfectly with that bounty hunter aesthetic, especially in the prequel era. And if I had to put him in that famous Empire Strikes Back bounty hunter lineup, he would definitely be before Zuckuss or Forlom. And honestly, on a good day, I think he might beat out Dengar for the amount of screen time. But this character is going to be our first operative for the Trade Federation, released alongside Padme, who will hopefully be hitting the shelves soon. However, as far as an operative goes in Star Wars Legion, I don't think Cad Bane and Padme could be more opposite in terms of their utility and battlefield role. Yes, both of them are victory point scoring characters, with one of them having the bounty keyword and the other having secret mission, but I think both of them will fit into lists and perform in the armies very, very differently. And without jumping ahead too far, I don't think Cad Bane is going to be quite as simple of an operative to master, and I don't think he's going to fit comfortably into every CIS list out there, unlike Padme, who I believe is going to fit into almost every clone list out there, regardless of what you take. And right off the bat, we know that Cad Bane is a bounty hunter, meaning he's going to have that bounty keyword guaranteed, and his whole build is likely going to revolve around that to a degree. But with no further ado, let's jump in and take a look at Cad Bane's unit card. First of all, in the top left, we see that he is 125 points. Not terribly expensive for a character, but it's pretty up there for an operative, and when you compare it to Padme's 90 points, I think that immediately feeds into my thesis statement that he's not going to fit into every list out there. Now, we all know the Trade Federation isn't strapped on points, and having those B1 battle droids means you can spend a lot more on your characters, but that is about 50% more expensive than Padme, and due to the nature of operatives in Star Wars Legion, they tend to either need to be cost efficient or be really heavy hitters to be viable in most lists. So I'm definitely not appalled by that 125 point cost. And I wouldn't even call it a red flag necessarily, but I do think it's somewhat of a yellow or maybe a bright orange flag, if that makes any sense. But that obviously is only the beginning of the overall picture, and we'll move along and look at Cad Bane's upgrade options, of which he has a pretty good amount. First, he is going to have a training upgrade, something you'd expect from a bounty hunter, but he does also have a comms upgrade, something that is somewhat unique to a trooper unit that isn't a droid. And after that, he is going to have a gear upgrade, something you'd expect from a bounty hunter, especially someone like Cad Bane, who always has a bunch of nifty tricks up his sleeve. After that, he is going to have an armament upgrade. And lastly, he's also going to have a grenade upgrade. And I'll tell you right now, having training, gear, and an armament option are all very welcome. As we've seen before on other operatives and commanders, these aren't always taken, but just having them there is very welcome. And even if there's no obvious synergy at the moment, it does open up options for potential future upgrades or synergies that might arise that could benefit from them. And really, I think they are just kind of staples to named characters in this franchise. But what really gets me going with Cad Bane is the fact that he has a comms upgrade, something that, like I said, is pretty rare on most flesh troopers, but could prove pretty useful as an operative, something we'll look at later when we look at the options for that. What I'm not too keen on, however, is the grenades. I just don't like grenades as it is. They're okay in trooper squads where you're going to have 4 to 6 models throwing said grenades. But on a hero with only one model throwing one grenade, it's usually almost always not going to trump their natural attack. Is it thematic? Absolutely. Is it going to be something you're going to take? Probably not. But again, something we'll look at later. After that, we are going to move along to the right side of the card, where he is going to be a 6 health trooper with Courage 3 and a white defense die. Now, 6-3 is always a welcome health and courage profile for any character in the game. A big red flag for me is whenever a character comes in lower than that on their stat line. And I have a feeling that ones who do fit stat lines lower than the 6-3 are going to become victims of power creep in due time. But it's pretty fitting for Cad Bane overall. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he had a 5-3 profile there, with only having 5 health. He seems like a pretty lanky and somewhat older Duros. I don't really see him being a tanky kind of person, but he definitely earns that Courage 3. I mean, we see this guy continuously and willingly engage Jedi at point-blank range. The guy is definitely a badass, and he knows it himself. So that's a fully earned stat right there, and as far as him being a lanky older Duros, maybe that's kind of levied out by having just a white defense die. After that, we are going to see that he has a surge to hit and a defensive surge on his profile. And while I feel like Cad Bane might be deserving of a surge to crit, that seems to be a pretty premium stat nowadays, and you don't see it pop up on more affordable characters. And let's be honest, any natural surge is welcome compared to none, and the defensive surge is especially welcome on the white defense die, as that is basically going to double your armor save, going from a traditional 6+ armor save to a 5+ armor save. Trust me, as a guy who used to Overwatch with a Tau army, that makes a huge difference when you're rolling a lot of dice. But after that, we see that Cad Bane has a speed 2, pretty standard for a trooper, and moving along to his weapon profile, we're going to see that he has martial arts for 3 black dice at melee, and then he's going to have his dual LL30 blaster pistols, which are range 1 to 2, shooting 4 black dice, with the Pierce 1 keyword. So while Cad may not have that surge to crit, he does have a Pierce 1, so the enemies who can't outright negate your hits likely will be suffering here. Of course, that's a bit lost on a lot of the Jedi characters who have an immunity to Pierce, and with Impervious starting to show up on more units like the ARC Troopers, it may lose a little bit of luster, but it's definitely a welcome keyword to have if it's going to be your only keyword. So, going off the baseline stats, what do I think of Cad Bane's unit card? Well, all around, I think it's pretty solid. It's not particularly amazing. It's all kind of black dice, basic surges, and a reliable health and courage pool based on a white defense die. But that's pretty phenomenal when you realize that this is an operative, and you're definitely going to be getting some keywords in there to flesh out this character. I think it's an incredibly strong basic building block for a unit. And since we know Cad Bane is going to have bounty, that somewhat reliable lethality is very much welcome here. But let's move along and look at the keywords that Cad Bane has, because these are really the things that are going to inform him as a character and how he operates on the battlefield. And first of all, he is going to have Jump 1, which is going to be reflective of those rocket boots that he does have. And this is a pretty fantastic keyword that you usually only see show up on Jedi characters. And most other gun-wielding troopers are going to have to take some upgrade cards like Grappling Hooks to get around terrain like this. And I think that will add a lot of utility to him as an operative. It's really great to be able to keep a character behind heavy cover, and then having him spring forward when he needs to, without having to reduce his movement speed at all. Also, let's just take into consideration the fact that R2-D2's rocket boosters are a command card while Cad Bane's are built into his character. I think that's a huge point to make, and if you're a Cad Bane fan and you really want to field this guy, I think that is a big bonus, because so many operatives seem to have their character quirks restricted to command cards, and having this as a keyword really frees up his command cards to do a lot more interesting things, which we will look at later. And I don't necessarily think I'm against this, but I do feel like it's a little bit biased, even if you are paying the points for it. But after that, we are going to have the bounty keyword on Cad Bane, something we all expected. He's a bounty hunter, so you get the bounty keyword in Legion. No shocker there, but it definitely adds a little bit more utility to these operatives, as they may help you eke out a victory. But from my personal experience, bounty is actually a pretty hard keyword to score, especially if you are actually playing the Clone Wars, because as things stand, we don't have a whole lot of characters or operatives. That being said, I think Padme is somewhat of a perfect mark for Cad Bane, and I think you're going to see him going after her in a lot of missions. And you also do have Obi-Wan, who is going to be likely taking damage through Source to Mastery, so Cad Bane might have an easier time scoring bounty than other characters like Bossk or Boba. However, it is going to rely you to have those opportune moments and to line things up pretty accordingly. And from my personal experience, Legion seems to be a little too cutthroat at times to be letting a Jedi live just so you can wait for Cad Bane to activate and kill him. Definitely a welcome keyword, and definitely one that's fitting to the character. But I don't think this keyword is going to be the reason that Cad Bane is in your list. I think it has a lot more potential for board control and objective scoring potential, and I think this bounty keyword is something that's probably only going to score you a victory maybe once every 10 games you field him. So yeah, it's expected, but in the overall crux of Cad Bane as a unit, I think this is a pretty insignificant keyword. But after that, we are going to have Danger Sense too. And whenever Cad Bane would have the potential to lose suppression tokens, you can choose not to. And when you're defending against an attack, you may roll 1 extra defense die for each suppression token you have, up to the number of 2. So let's say your enemy shoots at you and scores 3 hits, but you have 2 suppression tokens. That means you're able to roll 2 extra die for a total of 5 suppression tokens. And that really comes in handy when we look back at the white defense die with that defensive surge. Like I said, the more dice you're rolling, the better here. A 5+ armor save on a d6 die is a 1 in 3 chance, and every die you add to that pool is greatly increasing your chances of deflecting that wound. Now, I'm not going to do the math off the top of my head, but I have a feeling that that is going to make Cad Bane's white die feel a lot more like a red defensive die in the grand scheme of things. And this is really where Cad Bane's Courage 3 shines, as you're going to be able to comfortably take on suppression tokens without having to worry too much about him losing an action. So, for a character with white defense die, I think this is a fantastic keyword to have, and it's going to help them stick around to those late game scenarios where those 4 black dice with Pierce 1 are really going to come in handy. But keep in mind, it is not a flat free upgrade. You are going to have to play as a commander very well and make sure he has those stress tokens on him when he needs them. But after that, we see that Cad Bane has Sharpshooter 1, which is another very welcome keyword. This kind of negates the need for a surge to crit. If you have Sharpshooter 1 and Pierce 1, you're usually always going to be eking a wound through. And this is really going to hurt clone players who have those very elite points heavy units, as you're more or less going to be removing a model every time you score a hit, which is going to be happening with 4 black die on surge to hit. So a very useful keyword, all things considered. I'm very much a fan of Sharpshooter. It's always welcome on any units. And that is going to be followed up by Steady, meaning you can shoot after you perform a move action. And this is a great keyword to have on most units, but it's especially great to have on units that only have a range 2 weapon. There's many times in Star Wars Legion where you are going to have to decide between taking that coveted aim token or moving to fire at units, and if you have Steady, you don't have to make that decision. You can do both. You can take the aim token, then you can move, and then afterwards fire with Steady. For the basic infantry unit, it really is like having another action. And again, you overlay that with the jump keyword, and you have a pretty versatile mobile unit. One that's going to feel right at home, moving around the board and scoring objectives. And while that's not always the most exciting thing on Tabletop, I think it's pretty fitting for Cad Bane's character. There's many times where he doesn't always collect his bounty, but he usually gets some sort of objective or mission done, and even when he doesn't, he always seems to leave something behind to spite the enemy. So having Cad Bane be able to basically say F you to a unit he can't kill, and then jumping over a large piece of terrain to go capture an objective and then run away, is pretty befitting to Cad Bane as a character. But that wraps up Cad Bane's keywords and brings us to what I think of his card as a whole. Well, it's all pretty rudimentary and basic stuff that we've seen before. Nothing here is wildly unique. However, these rudimentary keywords do seem to play off each other very well. There's a lot of them that tie into each other, or his base stat line. Jump and Steady play into him being able to be hostile and mobile. Sharpshooter 1, Surge to hit, and Pierce 1 on his blasters feeds into a character that's going to be pretty reliably cranking out wounds, all of which in turn piles onto that bounty keyword. All while Danger Sense 2, piled on top of that white die with a defensive surge, really helps increase his overall durability. So most units in this game really tend to have one big thing that is the crux to them, and for Cad Bane, I can't say that that is something that comes from his keywords. Spoiler alert, it's in his command cards, but we'll look at that later. However, I do think these all feed off of each other in a very healthy manner and make for a pretty strong base stat card for units. And as we all know, those upgrade cards are going to help increase those incremental statistical levels of efficiency if optimized properly. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at Cad Bane's numerous upgrade options. And here we start with training. And the first card on our training upgrade is going to be Duck and Cover. And honestly, I think this might be the card to be taking on Cad Bane because of that Danger Sense 2. It's going to give you a lot more control as to when he can activate that keyword. And really, Danger Sense seems to just be made to synergize with this. And with most units, you're really only getting the bonuses of Duck and Cover if you don't already have a suppression token on you. And for a unit that can make use of it with Danger Sense 2, it kind of feels like you're doubling the efficiency of this 4-point card. And the fact that you might be wanting to keep Cad Bane alive to score that bounty or cap an objective will make this pretty ideal in a good amount of matches. And hey, when he's not focused on that, it's going to keep him alive to keep him shooting more rounds with that Sharpshooter 1 and Pierce 1. So I really do think this is going to be your default choice for Cad Bane. And while there are other viable options here, I don't think you're getting nearly as much utility for just 4 points. But it is obligatory that we go down and review the rest, and next up we are going to have Hunter, and this is a really great upgrade to have, especially on an operative unit that's going to have bounty, as he will be targeting characters with more than 1 wound. But at 6 points, I just don't think you're going to be needing Hunter here. You already have Steady, so you are likely going to be able to take that aim token, move, and fire in 1 turn. And with 4 black dice and a surge to hit, you're not going to need more than 1 aim token on average. So, while 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Hunter on a bounty keyword, this is the one scenario where I think it's just not a good use of 6 points. I think you're much better off using that duck and cover and helping Cad Bane stay alive after he scores that victory point. And after that, we are going to have Tenacity, and I think this might be a sleeper hit on Cad Bane. Bringing your martial arts melee skill from 3 black dice to 3 black dice and a red die is a pretty large improvement. And I will note that Cad Bane's armament upgrade is a melee-based weapon, so turning Cad Bane into a melee-based character might actually not be a totally bunk strategy. I don't think it's the one true Cad Bane build, but I think it's something that would be very fun to play. And as a casual wargamer, I definitely think I will be running a Cad Bane melee build at least once to try it out. So if you really want to be cutthroat with Cad Bane, I think Duck and Cover is still going to come out on top above Tenacity, but I definitely think it's a card worth trying out, one that could be a lot of fun in a melee build, something we will look at later. But after that, we are going to have Endurance, which is going to allow you to remove 1 suppression token at the end of your activation phase. And while one could argue that this is going to give you a lot of control over the suppression tokens you have to make sure you're using that danger sense without losing actions, Cad Bane does have a command card that benefits from having a lot of suppression tokens, so paying 6 points for a card like this is just not worth it. For characters with a courage of 3, there's usually only 1 point in a match where they reach that tipping point, where they might break off the battlefield. And if you have a command card that counters that, you really don't need to worry yourself with things like Endurance. So this is going to be a hard pass for me. And after that, we are going to have Overwatch, and we all know how useless Overwatch is when your range weapons are only range 2. I really don't like this card much to begin with, but when your gun's not even range 3, it's completely useless. Completely skip over this one on Cad Bane. It's basically spending points for nothing. And that moves us along to Offensive Push, which is an okay card. Having an aim token is good when you get the move, and that is going to allow Cad Bane to move twice, shoot with Steady, and get an aim token. Meaning you're going to have those turns where Cad Bane absolutely darts across the battlefield, still gets an aim token, and a pretty lethal shot off. But I think Cad Bane's offensive capabilities are already pretty stacked. I don't think he needs to worry too much about getting aim tokens. Again, with Steady, you're going to be able to take all 3 of those actions in 1 turn. This is just going to help you crank it up to 11 should you need Cad Bane to sprint across the board. But that's a pretty niche scenario, and if you're spreading your army out, it's one you're not really going to need to face. So unless you're very attuned with your command style and you like front-loading your entire army onto one objective or one side of the map, and you like having 1 unit to correspond to another or act as a rapid response unit, I think you could definitely skip Offensive Push. The idea of Cad Bane making 2 speed 2 movements with jump 1 across the board and still firing with an aim token is pretty funny, but the odds of you having to do that and then also whiffing your dice enough to justify the presence of that exhaustible aim token is pretty low in my book, and I think that just means these 4 points are better spent elsewhere. And lastly, we are going to have the new Situational Awareness card, and that's going to allow you to spend a dodge token to cancel critical results. And at just 2 points, this is a pretty good card, but in this scenario, because of Danger Sense, I think Duck and Cover is just going to be a lot better here. I don't think Cad Bane is going to be taking a lot of dodge tokens, and personally, I think you're better off relying on those extra saves to prevent that incoming damage. So overall, as far as Cad Bane's training upgrades go, I think it's pretty cut and clear here. Duck and Cover is going to be your go-to winner, something that I think is more or less mandatory on him, and I think Tenacity may be worth taking, should you take his armament upgrade. But let's move along and take a look at the comms upgrade, again something that is very unique to a trooper character operative unit. And first up here we have Comms Jammer, and this might actually be pretty fantastic on Cad Bane. When we look at Cad Bane's command cards, we're going to learn that he is quite the disruptor, and having the Comms Jammer on him might further disrupt your enemy's game on a level they may not anticipate. And without giving away the command cards too much, Cad Bane is going to have a lot of board control abilities, one of which includes him deploying right in the enemy's face when they may not expect it. And the implications of that, with a comms jammer strapped onto him, are pretty significant. He's not going to be able to completely disrupt your enemy lines as they throw their command card down, but it will force your enemy commander to plan around him, and is definitely going to inconvenience any nearby units. And if you're playing Cad Bane's command cards right, layering comms jammer on top of them could be a very, very devastating battlefield control mechanism. Pair that with a commander like Dooku, and I think you could have some pretty comical board control moments, where your enemy might feel satisfied blasting away your 30 B1 battle droids, but you're gonna have the last laugh while you deny almost every face-up order token they try and issue. So I will be giving the comms jammer upgrade a thumbs up on Cad Bane. I think it's gonna come in handy more times than it won't. But I think a skilled opponent will be able to navigate around this and circumvent the drawbacks that it may impose. So if you're strapped for points, this is definitely an upgrade that you could skip. So if you have 5 points available in your list and you're competing between, say, a B1 battle droid upgrade, I would say take this. But if someone like Dooku has an open force power slot, I would definitely take that over the comms jammer on Cad Bane. It's gonna be good, but not super fantastic, so it's up to your discrepancy as a list builder and a commander to determine whether you have the points for something like this. It's not a luxury item, but it's definitely not essential either, so take that as you will. And after that, we are gonna have the long-range comlink. And while this might be somewhat useful for Cad Bane, considering the fact that he can deploy almost anywhere on the battlefield, he also has the ability to issue orders to himself, and I think when you need him to activate, you're going to be doing that anyways. So at 5 points, I think you're going to be skipping long-range comlink. There's just so many ways to increase that command range on Legion, and most of the time you really don't even need it. And that's going to move us pretty swiftly along to the next card, which is going to be HQ Uplink. And I usually like this upgrade a lot on operative characters, because operatives are very much one of those odd man out tokens, and they do tend to really upset that ebb and flow of which order token you're trying to draw from your pool. But the thing about the Trade Federation is that you are getting that coordinate ability with most of their units. And really, if you're building your list right, you're gonna know exactly which tokens you have face up and the ones you have face down in your order pool. So while I do find HQ Uplink extremely useful on operative characters, I think these are 10 points that you could easily save in your Trade Federation list, so long as you preemptively plan how you're gonna coordinate and get those face up order tokens throughout your army. So after some careful thought, I think that HQ Uplink is likely going to be a skip on Cad Bane. That being said, if you plan on running a pretty diverse list of Trade Federation units, one that may not have a reliable amount of coordination abilities, this is definitely worth taking. But honestly, I think the coordination ability is one of the strongest features of the Trade Federation army, and there's a lot of units that synergize with it, and if you're building a list that neglects that, I think you might be doing Trade Federation wrong. I don't know, we'll see what happens in the future, but personally I think this is a skip. And lastly, for the Trooper Comms upgrades, we are going to have Comms Relay. And while this isn't a particularly great upgrade for most operative units, there is a little bit of inverse ideology here that applies similarly to the HQ Uplink. If you give Cad Bane's face-up order tokens and just pass it along to a B1 battle droid unit and coordinate the rest of your army, you could potentially have an army full of face-up order tokens, while Cad Bane's order token is the only one sitting in the pool, ready to be pulled. It could be a pretty crafty workaround, one that might be more cost-effective than HQ Uplink, but I don't know, I just don't see that being worth it. I'd rather leave this slot blank than take that 5-point upgrade. I could definitely see a clever and unique list arising in some local meta where someone always takes this on Cad Bane, and that really highlights the uniqueness of the Trade Federation where so much of their army is created in the list building phase. But yeah, I don't know, I just don't see this being an upgrade to take on Cad Bane. I think there's other units that would be better off with the Comms Relay. So overall, I really think the only super viable option here is the comms jammer. I think it's a pretty good upgrade, one that's going to come in handy on Cad Bane more so than a lot of other units. But again, I don't think it's a total necessity. I think it's a B to B plus upgrade, and other 5-point upgrades like Force Choke that I would consider A plus would be worth taking over this. But having that option is definitely nice, and I would definitely give it a few spins before discounting it entirely. But after that, we are moving along to the gear upgrades for Cad Bane, and here, number 1, we have targeting scopes. And this is basically going to allow you to reroll an extra die should you spend a name token. And this is an upgrade I take on almost every clone trooper unit who are rolling 4 black die every time they shoot with their base stats. But it's worth noting that I usually do take at least 1 upgrade weapon with them, and they don't have that natural built-in surge to hit. So I think 4 black die with Sharpshooter, Pierce, and Surge to hit is kind of on that threshold of where targeting scope starts losing the value at 4 points. And honestly, I think this upgrade is going to come down to whether you feel like you are a lucky person or not. If you do feel like you don't have problems with dice, you don't need to worry about this. But if you're like me and you feel like the dice are always conspiring against you, you might want to take targeting scopes here. Much like Comms Jammer, it's not going to always be the hottest commodity, and I think if you have extra points in your army, there might be other ways you could spend it better. But if your commanders are already fully pimped out, and you have nothing but Cad Bane and B1 battle droids to upgrade, this should be a decent use of points. But again, because of that overall threshold of the 4 black die with a surge to hit, I'm definitely going to mark these as a maybe more so than a bona fide yes. And really, if I had to choose, I would be taking Comms Jammer before targeting scopes. But after that, we are going to have Grappling Hooks, and for the most part, this is going to be pretty useless. I always consider these pretty niche, but Cad Bane has Jump 1, and most boards very, very rarely have terrain that is higher than Height 1. But after that, we are going to have the environmental gear that's going to allow you to ignore difficult terrain, and for the most part, this is going to be a pass for me. As always, it's going to kind of depend on your local meta. I really don't see difficult terrain showing up, especially not nearly as much as walls or things that Jump 1 are going to negate. But let's say a tournament mandates that there is 4 to 6 pieces of what you would consider difficult terrain. This could be a versatile upgrade to take on Cad Bane that's going to allow him to get over most terrain on the battlefield and further increase his mobility. But in contemporary wargaming, I think that line of sight terrain is just way more emphasized than difficult terrain, and that means you're really just not going to have to worry about things like this. So environmental gear is going to be a skip for me for the most part. But hey, what's new? And after that, we are going to have emergency stims that's going to allow you to stay alive for another activation. And to be honest, the more units I review this card for, the more I am less attracted to it. It definitely has its uses. It's definitely going to help keep your unit alive for another turn of attacking. But honestly, unless your unit is a massive powerhouse of damage, I don't really find this to be the most useful upgrade, especially at 12 points. Sure, Cad Bane's a good objective grabber, but you already have a lot of movement capabilities to help him achieve that, and I don't think you need to rely on desperate measures to get his battlefield role done. Now, I could see this being useful in a Cad Bane melee build, where you make use of your armament to pop off some extra keyword bonuses there, but honestly, it just feels like too many what-ifs for a 12-point card, and at the end of the day, you might just be paying 12 points just to crank out 1 extra wound in that last turn. Sure, it might also help him pop off a command card, but again, that's a lot of ifs. But I'm still going to mark this card as a maybe for the upgrade slot there. Cad Bane is a bit of a disruptor unit, and keeping him alive for 1 more activation may help increase that roll, but it's very much a take it or leave it upgrade here, one that I think I will be skipping most of the time unless I have points to spare. And after that, for 2 points, we are going to have the Recon Intel card, and I don't think you're going to be taking this on Cad Bane, because to the best of my knowledge, it does not mesh with his infiltration ability that we will look at later in his command cards. So for the most part, even though it's only 2 points, I don't think Recon Intel is ever actually going to come into play on Cad Bane. And to put things bluntly, if you're deploying Cad Bane traditionally, I think you are kind of misusing him as a unit. But after that, we have electro binoculars, something that you're just not going to want to use on Cad. This is built for less important and less lethal units that are just not going to be doing much with shooting, and they're better off passing aim tokens on to other more important units. Sure, you could take this and then give them electro binoculars, pass aims off to other units, and then steady and shoot. But at 8 points, I don't think that's a strategy that's worth it, and these can more or less be ignored. And lastly, we are going to have the new card that is Ascension Cables, and this is basically an exhaustible that's giving you the best of both worlds for grappling hooks and environmental gear. The problem with Cad Bane is that you don't really need grappling hooks advantage, as you have jump 1, so this card loses a lot of its luster. And again, going back to the points I made with grappling hooks and environmental gear, you can kinda just skip this one overall. A natural jump 1 should be more than enough to service Cad Bane and his mobility around the battlefield. So overall, I think Cad Bane is going to be one of those units where there's no bona fide must-take gear options. Targeting scopes and emergency stims might be okay, but for the most part, if you're looking to save points, you can skip right over them, and I would definitely recommend putting on either a comms or training upgrade before either of those two. But that moves us along to Cad Bane's armament, which is going to be the Electro Gauntlets. And at 10 points, you are getting an exhaustible melee attack with 4 red die. And this keyword is going to allow you to perform moves with a unit that has 1 or more immobilized token on it, regardless of whether this card is exhausted or not. Speaking of which, this card has immobilized 3. And that means any unit wounded by this card is going to gain 3 immobilized tokens. That means if Cad Bane punches someone with these Electro Gauntlets, they are not going to be moving this turn, as they will not be removing those immobilized tokens until the end of their next activation. The previous text also more or less gives you a free disengage so long as the unit is immobilized. And that's going to give you a lot of utility whether you attack before or after your enemy is activated. Let's say they haven't activated and you move in and engage them with the Electro Gauntlet. You can punch them with those 4 red dice, immobilize them, and then move away so they can't strike back. Alternatively, you can move in, punch them after they have activated, and then next turn, you can activate before them, move away from them, and then use your steady to fire again. It's a pretty nifty little attack that's going to allow Cad Bane to neutralize melee characters and slow down their advance across the battlefield. I think this is one that is going to require a lot of commander finesse to use properly, but as the Republic faction expands and gets more Jedi, I think this could be a pretty fantastic upgrade. It just is going to need some practice before you learn how to do it properly. But it's also worth noting that this is a suppressive attack that's going to layer on more suppression tokens onto your enemy, which will further synergize with some potential CIS lists and some of Cad Bane's command cards that we'll look at later. So even if you're not really pulling off that immobilize and disengage super well, you still are going to have 4 red melee dice and suppressive keyword hitting your enemy, and that's a pretty respectable amount of melee damage, especially if you consider endurance and the fact that you may have an extra red dice in that attack pool. So at 10 points, even though it's exhaustible, I think this is a pretty powerful armament upgrade to have. And while I don't think this is a necessity on Cad Bane, I think it's a very welcome upgrade. And as far as exhaustible abilities go, I think this is one where you could probably only use once in a match strategically and still justify its 10-point investments. And lastly, we will move along and look at the grenades for Cad Bane, and I'll be honest, for the most part, I think you're going to be ignoring most of these. They're, for the most part, just too much of a downgrade from your basic attack, as you will be going from 4 to just 1 die to get a specific keyword, and for the most part, Pierce is going to be a better keyword than most of the ones that the grenades will offer you. Maybe you could use smoke grenades to shield yourself and claim that bounty token, maybe you can use droid poppers to ionize something like a saber tank, but those again are all pretty big ifs, and I don't think the points are ever worth it. So all the grenades on Cad Bane are going to be a skip for me. I know that's being pretty dismissive, and if you disagree with me, please leave a comment below describing your reasoning behind that. But we will be moving along with my recommendations of how to equip Cad Bane. And first of all, if you're looking to get really cutthroat, I think you can run Cad Bane with just duck and cover. This alone, I think, is going to play in very well with his keywords, and you're not going to be over-investing in other upgrades that may or may not be kicking in during the match. That being said, a comms jammer is also welcome onto Cad Bane if you're going for a general disruption and crowd control sort of list. And hey, you know what, if you know you're going to be going up against melee units, especially Jedi, go ahead and equip them with that Electro Gauntlet. And if you do plan on equipping that Electro Gauntlet, and you plan on playing very offensively with Cad Bane, maybe even consider swapping out Duck and Cover for Tenacity. Personally, I think that running him with just duck and cover might be the most cutthroat option here, but I think the other upgrades recommended here are viable and may add a lot of flavor in more casual meta games. But really, we don't get the full picture of Cad Bane as a unit until we look at his command cards. Because unlike a lot of other operatives, especially his bounty hunter counterparts, Cad Bane is a schemer, he's a planner, and his cards reflect that. It's not gadgets or weapons, but rather utensils that are going to help him manipulate his control over the battlefield. And that's pretty great, because up until this point of the video, Cad Bane has kind of just been this pistol duelist, and there hasn't really been any keywords or information that informs his designated role on the battlefield. But that all changes when we look at his 3-pip command card, I Make the Rules Now, which is arguably his most important command card. And this is going to be a divulge card, meaning you will have the option to either keep this card in your hand or reveal it at the beginning of the game and play it on your first turn for varying effects. And I'll be honest with you, I think if you're playing Cad Bane, you will 100% be taking this command card with him. This really is the crux that I was talking about earlier that informs this unit. And without it, I really think you are missing the point of Cad Bane, and there's almost no reason you're not going to be taking it. And on top of that, I think you're going to be divulging this card 9 out of 10 times. I think there's going to be very rare scenarios in which you do not divulge it, and we're going to take a look at why. So if this card is not divulged, meaning you do not reveal it at the beginning of the game, you're going to place one Bane token anywhere within range 1 of Cad Bane, and beyond range 1 of all enemy units. That means you will be deploying Cad Bane normally, and then placing one Bane token within range 1 of him. What is a Bane token exactly? Well, Cad Bane comes with 3 different tokens. These tokens are placed face down on the battlefield, and when an enemy comes within range 1 of one, it is flipped and then the effect is revealed. Each of the tokens has a different effect, of course. One of them is Smoke and Mirrors, which is more or less a dud that can be deployed to intimidate or bluff against your enemy. It has no actual effect when it's revealed, but your enemy is going to try and tiptoe around it because he might be scared that it's going to be one of the other 2 following tokens. And the next one we'll look at is going to be Kablamo, and it's very obvious why you'd want to avoid this. It's an explosive with range 1, 2 red dice, 2 black dice, surge to crit, blast, impact 2, and suppressive. Quite a nasty little explosion there. That has a good chance of doing damage, especially against enemy armored units. And even if it doesn't score a whole lot of damage, it is suppressive, meaning it's going to help you layer on those tokens when you're trying to get an enemy to run off the table. And the last of the 3 tokens is Here I Am. And at the beginning of any turn, or when an enemy unit comes within range 1 of this token, it may be revealed and Cad Bane may be deployed on the token's location, be it from another location on the battlefield or deploying onto the battlefield for the first time. So if you're not divulging this card, you're going to be able to put Cad Bane down on the battlefield and then have him drop one of these tokens when this card is played. So if he's deployed normally and running across the battlefield to engage an enemy, and he passes by something like, say, an objective marker, he can go ahead and throw down one of these tokens right by it. Now, it's safe to assume that you'll be dropping either a mine to guard that position, or perhaps the Here I Am token so Cad Bane can teleport back to it and capture it later on. But if you really wanted to troll your opponents, you could throw down a Smoke and Mirrors there and laugh at the end of the game as you flip the token that he's been avoiding, only to realize it was nothing all along. And that's great and very fitting for Cad Bane. He does seem a little cruel like that, and he likes to kind of toy with his prey. And I could definitely see myself doing that in casual games against my friends. But you are only going to be throwing down one token with this card if it's not divulged. But I don't really see playing this 3-pip card halfway through the game to be very advantageous for you. Cards like this are great in the first turn of the game, where everyone's usually throwing down standing orders anyways. And that early in the game, I don't think you're going to have too many great places to throw down those tokens. I mean, dropping a Here I Am or a mine near your deployment zone might be a good counter against those secret mission units. But I don't think you're really capitalizing on Cad Bane's tokens or his board control abilities unless you're divulging this card. And that's because if you do divulge this card during the deploy unit step, you're going to place all 3 of those Bane tokens on the battlefield, outside range 1 of any deployment zone, and Cad Bane himself will not be deployed on the table and instead show up on that Here I Am token either when you trigger it at the beginning of a turn or when an enemy comes within range 1 of it. And right away you can see the benefits here. You're going to have 3 face-down tokens on the battlefield that your enemy is going to have to gamble with encountering, as 2 of them are potentially lethal. Cad Bane may not be the most imposing character when it comes to offensive stat lines, but you definitely don't want him popping up right in your face when you don't expect it. This is also going to give you a ton of control over scoring objectives, as Cad Bane will be able to deploy right on top of one early game and score an objective should he wish. And throwing a mine on top of another nearby objective is only going to help you capture that one also, by deterring or damaging enemies who go near it. This is also going to be great for that electro-shock gauntlets and using Comms Jammer on Cad Bane, as this is going to allow him to get up and close with his enemies very quickly to either immobilize them or disrupt their distribution of order tokens. And as I mentioned earlier with that Smoke and Mirrors token, you're going to be playing a lot of mind games with your enemy. And even on sections of the board where you don't have an actual hostile token down, you will have those scenarios where you will be smirking behind your cards as the enemy circumnavigates that Smoke and Mirrors token that you're bluffing with. And really, it's going to require you as a commander to not just play your cards right, but also have a really good poker face, which I think is just absolutely awesome and adds a new element that hasn't been in the game yet. And before we move on to Cad Bane's next command card, I want to just mention how few restraints there are in how you can place these tokens. You can pile them up in one concentrated area, you can drop them near other enemy infiltrating units. It's just very flexible, and I think in the future with more keywords, different units, and new missions coming out, you might see this actually kind of turn into a cheese strategy, where Cad Bane can kind of just drop into areas and accomplish things that other characters or units just can't do that quickly. And I can't say for certain, but it could cause a power creep in Cad Bane's favor in the future. But as it stands now, it's a very cool dynamic that is going to allow you to really mess with your enemies, and I think that's going to be a ton of fun in casual games. And that moves us along to his next card, and that is, I'm in control now. God, that's hard to do. But this is Cad Bane's 2-pip card, and the only card of his that activates another unit along with him. And this card reads, at the beginning of Cad Bane's activation, he may transfer any number of his suppression tokens onto any number of trooper units at range 1 to 2, friendly or enemy. And each enemy unit that receives a suppression token this way is also going to gain an immobilized token. Note that it's only one immobilized token. You can give them 4 suppression tokens and they'll still only get 1. And honestly, I think you are going to be running this a lot of times you're running Cad Bane also. This is a pretty fantastic suppression bomb, and one that further reinforces my previous point where you're going to want to take duck and cover on Cad Bane. You can really just load this guy up with suppression tokens, and then just dump them all on your enemies with a 2-pip command card. It's a really awesome ability that kind of reminds me of Master of Evil and Rex's recovery card, where you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, and it's going to fit really well into any suppression-oriented list. And when you take into consideration the Kablamo token along with the Electro Gauntlets, Cad Bane is actually a pretty respectable output for suppression tokens. So if you properly load up Cad Bane and hold on to all of his suppression tokens, you can actually do a lot of damage here, and dish them back out to the units of your choice at range 1 to 2. And that's pretty nasty because range 2 is a full foot on the board. That is a lot for miniatures. And you will likely be removing actions from your enemies if you play this right. And honestly, even if you don't have the most opportune scenarios in which you can use this card, it might just act as a deterrent for your enemy to shoot at Cad Bane. A skilled enemy commander may not want to put too many suppression tokens on him, especially if he has duck and cover. And sure, that might be counterintuitive if you want him to pull off that suppression bomb, but at the end of the day, that means this unit's going to be alive longer and dishing out more damage against enemy units. So I think this is a pretty phenomenal 2-pip. And while I don't think it's always going to be a game-winning card, you could pull off some pretty great Annihilation Looms style suppression bombs. And I think once every blue moon, Cad Bane is going to have models running off the table en masse. And with the arrival of Cad Bane and this command card being revealed, it kind of heralds in that theory I had of the CIS being the prequel faction suppression list. And honestly, I think it's pretty cool to see an army other than Imperials have that avenue of approach to list building. And Cad Bane's overall profile is also a very unique way to implement suppression into a character. It's not just having guns that dish out suppression, but rather a myriad of abilities and command cards that require skill and timing to use. So I think for the most part that you are also going to be including I'm in control whenever you bring Cad Bane to the table. Because I think when you are bringing Cad Bane, you are going to be trying to use that suppression and levy it in your favor. But the fact that this activates another unit is also pretty useful, as it is going to allow you to start your coordination throughout your battle droids and prevent that AI attack from falling into place. Still, I think a lot of Cad Bane's command cards are either going to be played very early in the game, such as with I Make the Rules Now, or very late in the game where your B1 battle droids are already starting to crumble, and you don't really need to rely on that coordination as much. But after that, we are moving along to Cad Bane's last command card, and this is his 1-pip card.
I'm your worst nightmare.
And this one, it just activates Cad Bane himself, and he gains the Uncanny Luck 2 keyword, and during his activation, he may perform up to 2 attack actions. So here we very much have a kind of hero 1-pip, where it's just going to kind of crank that character into overdrive for 1 turn, and I think this will be a pretty good late game 1-pip to drop for Cad Bane. His attack pool isn't crazy impressive, but being able to fire twice with 4 black dice, with Sharpshooter and Pierce 1, is definitely going to put out some damage, and maybe finish off some heroes in those turn 5 or turn 6 matches, where every last dice roll can help you secure the game. Uncanny Luck 2 is also more or less an aim token for your defensive rolls, so you are going to be able to reroll 2 failed defensive rolls in this scenario. And again, going back to that defensive surge, the more dice you're rolling, the better, and I think Cad Bane's going to be about as durable as a white defense die can get. So overall, this 1-pip is pretty rudimentary, but it's also just very solid. It's kind of just what you need from a 1-pip, and considering that Cad Bane is going to be a very in-your-face character, especially if you're running him with those Electro Gauntlets, something like this is only going to help increase that point investment value that you put into him. So what do I think about Cad Bane's command cards overall? Well, for an operative, I think they're pretty fantastic. And like I said with my R2 unit review, I think when you buy a character in this game, you're not really just paying points for their card and their profile and their keywords, you're also paying points for the command cards they bring with them. And while I don't think Cad Bane himself, based on his baseline stats, is worth 125 points, I think his command cards definitely make up for that. However, if you're building a droid army list that really relies on that coordination throughout your B1 battle droid line, Cad Bane might throw a wrench in that a little bit. I think he is more of a sort of insurgency list, where you're focusing more on characters, and perhaps things like commando droids, who aren't going to need to rely on that sort of army-wide synergy that most of the B1s do. But I do think that's pretty flavorful and true to Cad Bane as a character, as he usually is more of an independent operator, who just sort of collaborates with the Trade Federation rather than leads them to battle. So how would I recommend using Cad Bane on the tabletop? Well, first of all, I think you definitely need to build him from the list up, and your list very much needs to incorporate him in your overall strategy. I think he will be a fantastic unit in a suppression list that will coordinate with Count Dooku using things like Fear, and other units like Droidekas. However, I think he will be great at scoring victory points, not necessarily because of that bounty keyword, but more so because of the ability to kind of just jump in and claim objectives. That's going to be very good for securing supplies, and also just kind of generally deterring enemies and creating some sort of area control in certain choke points of the battlefield where you want it. However, Cad Bane isn't cheap, and if you plan on taking those Electro Gauntlets along with Comms Jammer and Duck and Cover, you're getting close to a 150 point character. And with Electro Gauntlets being exhaustible, I'm not really sure if he's going to be able to pull off his points worth. I think it's not only going to require some cunning strategy, but also a lot of luck with the dice. And honestly, I think he is going to be a great disruption unit for the first several games you play with him. But as more players encounter Cad Bane and learn how to deal with him, I think he will be struggling to justify his presence on the battlefield. Abilities like Supporting Fire, which the clones have innately built in, are going to be especially deadly against Cad Bane, as it's going to reduce the efficiency of his danger sense and that duck and cover you take along with him. And I think an experienced player is going to expect where Cad Bane's going to be, send in the right amount of elements to counter him, and then focus fire and wipe him out before he can react. I also very much want to emphasize here how you should be deploying Cad Bane. This whole video I've talked about deploying him on objectives or jumping him in to combat enemies, but your timing as a commander is really going to be key with that. Much like Droidekas, if you send him in too early or on his own, he is going to be taken out relatively quickly. Cad Bane should be making his appearance when your enemies are already stressed and already have too much on their plate to deal with, meaning he is going to be a threat mounting on top of other existing threats. He's not a Jedi Knight or an AAT who's just going to be kind of a stone wall firing away at your enemies. The timing of his battlefield presence will be key. Also, don't be afraid to use him to go cap objectives rather than fight enemies. I think some of the best elements on Cad Bane's unit card is his ability to infiltrate and also maneuver the battlefield relatively rapidly, and that's something that could likely win you the game, more so than just taking pot shots at nearby units. But really, the fact that you have steady built in means that you can do both. Just remember that Star Wars Legion is a game about scoring objective points, and you should keep your mind on the objectives more so than killing enemies. But I really do like Cad Bane as a unit. He's very cool, he's very fluffy, and I think he will be a ton of fun to play. But truly, I don't think he's going to be anything hyper competitive, and the more you use him in your list, the more I think you will see diminishing returns. He's very much a mind game character, and the more exercise your opponent has with those mind games, the better they're going to be able to counter them. And at the end of the day, 125 points isn't that cheap. And if you're kitting him out with upgrades, even the more essential ones, he's going to be getting up there in points. And I think you will be having games where he struggles to make those points back. So overall, based on my predictions, I'm going to give Cad Bane a unit review score of a C+. I think he is a very fun and unique operative, and I think he's going to be great to throw in your list every now and then to spice things up. And I'll be honest, as things stand, the Trade Federation seems to have a pretty awesome risk-reward with all of their characters and army builds. They're a very fun faction to build heroes around, and the fact that most of their upgrade cards land on their commander units makes for a very clean and easy to upkeep army. But at the end of the day, I just don't see Cad Bane fitting into an army quite as well as Padme does with the clones. Like I said, he seems like a ton of fun to play, but I think he is only going to be showing up in every other list in casual play, and with more competitive players, you might see him show up at 1 every 3 or 4 lists. But at a tournament level, I think most players are just going to skip right over him, especially as the Trade Federation gets more operatives and characters. But the beautiful thing about Star Wars Legion is that these flavorful upgrades you can throw into any army only cost about $15, and really, I don't see any reason why a Trade Federation player shouldn't have this operative in their arsenal. We don't have a whole lot of options, and if you're really looking to enjoy yourself, I would definitely pick up Cad Bane. I think Bane tokens are going to be a ton of fun to play with, and I cannot wait to throw those down on the tabletops and see my friends try and call my bluffs. But I want to know what you guys think about Cad Bane as a unit. Do you guys agree with the equipment I recommended for him? Do you think he's going to be viable on the tabletop? Do you think I'm underselling him? Leave a comment below. As always, explain your reasoning behind it. And if you like this video, go ahead and leave a like. Consider subscribing and turning on notifications. And until next time, guys, take care.